G'day, welcome back to Super Freak. I'm excited to be here. I'm sitting at my desk. It's quite late at night, actually. I'm wrapped up in my snuggliest clothes. And this is the first episode I've recorded in quite some time. Not because I didn't have things to say. Usually when I go quiet, it's because I don't have anything to say, but this time it was because I didn't want to speak from a place of urgency or performance or pressure to explain. A lot has been unfolding behind the scenes in my life, and while I won't be unpacking that here, at least not now, what I will say is it's reminded me this recent season again and again why this kind of work really matters. The work of coming back to your center, the work of meeting yourself in the quiet, in the wobble, in the moments where no one else sees, but you're with you. And that is the work of self-coaching. And that's what brought me here. That's what carried me through. That's what we're talking about today. So there was a moment recently actually where I realized I was about to make a really big decision from fear, not just ordinary fear, but the kind where your brain starts kind of mapping out the worst case scenario, like it's a sure thing. And that decision would have impacted others and it would have impacted my future. And right in that moment, I paused unexpectedly and I was kind of under pressure. I was on a call, had to make a decision. I paused and took a breath and I just asked myself a question that I ask my clients all the time. And the question was, how do you really want this to go? Like, what's the ultimate outcome of this situation? Now, that's the kind of question that I love to ask clients because sometimes when we're in a bit of a pickle, we start trying to solve the problem by thinking about what's the next logical step. And we're using the same kind of thinking that is either caught up in the problem or continues the problem or that created the problem in the first place to try and get out of the problem. And if you're answering the question from a place of, well, this is actually where I want to go, you will make very different choices in the moment. You're not just putting out fires, you're actually thinking sort of big pictures. So that's what happened, just really instinctively and naturally. How do I want this to go? And that single question for me just rerouted everything. I made a completely different choice, one that I felt way more aligned to, way more me. And I mean, who knows if it was the better choice? I'll never know, but it feels so much better. And that moment really reminded me this work lives in us. Self-coaching in that moment didn't just help me think clearly, it helped me remember who I am. And when the stakes are high, especially when your choices impact others, there's nothing more powerful than knowing that you can trust yourself. Above all else, you have got you, which you do. Professional advice is really, really helpful, but only you have got the access to the full landscape of your inner world at any time. And that's what makes this work of self-coaching so essential, in my opinion. So this episode is for anyone who's been in the thick of it, quietly trying to find their way back to themselves, to center. Maybe you're looking for a little bit of self-coaching. If that's you, welcome. Let's begin. So I'm going to acknowledge the fact that I've not been around on the podcast. If you've been listening for a while, you may have noticed. It doesn't matter if you didn't, because that's not the way I run this podcast anyway, that you expect anything. But I will admit, coming back after a little bit of a break and after going through some stuff, I was feeling a little bit nervous. I was feeling a little bit like, oh my gosh, do I even remember how to talk? Of course I do. I didn't come back because I felt ready. I came back because I remembered that not feeling ready is not a problem. Sometimes it's not about waiting until everything is clear or perfect. It's about just deciding to return anyway to the things that feel most like you. And for me, this podcast is one of those things. So let's talk about self-coaching because really I have self-coaching to thank for even being back here. So what is it? What is self-coaching? Self-coaching is the act of meeting yourself the way that a great coach would meet you without needing a great coach in front of you. Self-coaching is not a substitute for coaching. It's a skill that makes every session that you have more impactful and longer lasting results. It's what helps you integrate, process, and move forward between conversations. More specifically, it is not just journaling, it's not venting, it's not dumping everything out in the open. And this is really important. It's also not just trying to gaslight yourself into not feeling the way that you really feel. I think sometimes where people really shoot themselves in the foot, if I can say that, is we use these tools and these peak performance or mindset shifting sort of tools to talk ourselves out of reality. You know, like sometimes you're actually feeling the way that you're feeling and your feelings are actually valid and you're feeling them because something is very wrong, for example, or something is very right. And because it's not convenient, we sort of self-coach ourselves into not thinking that anymore. That's not what we're doing with self-coaching. Just want to be really clear about that. We're not trying to talk ourselves out of the truth. What it is the process of noticing what's really going on beneath the surface and asking, what is true here? Maybe then, what is helpful? What's not helpful? What do I need? What would be a better feeling thought? What's real here? What are the facts? And what are the fallacies? You can ask yourself any number of questions, but the real essence of it is looking at what is going on underneath the surface and looking for anything you can kind of clear on your own. So it brings you back into now, it brings you back into your power, it brings you back into your ability to think clearly and make decisions. It means reaching for the tools that you already have and doing the very best you can in that moment. Sometimes that means taking a breath and walking yourself through a process that you know works. And other times it just means being present with what is so you can move through it on the spot. In my work teaching NLP, people learn these really specific tools for coaching others through an enormous variety of challenging situations and also to overcome upper limits as well as things that are in the way of like functioning. But often they don't realize that the most powerful way to use these tools is actually on yourself. And you can, because most coaching tools are really just steps that another person would take you through, and you've got your eyes closed and you're doing it in your mind anyway. So that means if you wanted to coach yourself, you just need to know the steps of the process, the steps to take, and to be able to flick your mindset from doing the process to just slightly stepping out of it for a second, remembering what the next stage is, and then guiding yourself to take that next stage and then going into it. It's kind of like, you know, the chair process where you might sit in one chair and ask yourself a question, then go sit in another chair and pretend that you're answering the question and you didn't ask yourself the question. That's kind of what you're doing in self-coaching, but you just do it all in your mind. So you'd be able to practice going from asking a question or prompting yourself to answering. And everyone can do this with a little bit of practice. I'm going to show you briefly how to do it today, but I want you to know that there are so many tools out there and you can self-coach using pretty much all of them. I can't say for sure because I don't know every single tool that exists, obviously. But I can say with confidence, there is a way to find yourself in most tools able to do a version of it on you and on your own. So here's what you need. What you need is, number one, the process or the coaching tool that you would take someone else through. Maybe that's in the form of a script or a series of steps. And that's what I mean by tool. So that might be an NLP script for a particular tool, like the emotion process, for example, or you might know another one from another modality, or you might have a recording of a tool that someone else has done or something that you have done yourself. So you need the actual tool, whether it's in your mind, on a piece of paper, or it's being recorded. You need the ability to do it on yourself. So whether that's recording it or knowing that you're going to read it, then stop and then do it, then open your eyes and read the next bit. There might be an app that can do it for you. You might need a journal so you can write the questions out and then answer them yourself in writing. It really depends on the process. That's why I said I'm going to briefly talk you through how to do it today, because it's going to be different depending on the process. And you need to dedicate time, which in my opinion is the hardest thing to do. Because even though we know we have the tools, we don't often just sit down and use them. And what amazes me about this is it can literally change your perspective on life in a matter of minutes, sometimes under 20 minutes or 15 minutes. But even knowing that as human beings, we sit down and we resist things now. I've done everything I can in my world to try and overcome that, including turning my scripts into a beautiful leather-bound hardcover book that sits on my desk that I give to my students as well. But even sometimes then I still don't reach for it because I'm a human. That's what we do. So you need the ability to do it on yourself and you need to dedicate some time to do it. What I recommend to my students is when they're learning these tools to actually devote an hour once a week to sitting down and going, okay, what emotions are there? You just run through all of the tools and practice one on yourself once a week just to develop that skill. And then finally, how to do it. And that's the simplest part. Okay, you're actually going to be disappointed with this because it's less than fancy, but that's a good thing. It means there's a really low barrier to entry in terms of being able to do this for yourself. You don't have to have taken a coaching training. You could look something up on YouTube and do self-coaching. Okay, it's a very, very broad definition. So what I used to do was, because I had these scripts and I didn't know them off by heart and I needed to read them with my clients, I didn't feel comfortable or safe to kind of do the process on myself because I didn't know what I was supposed to say next. So before I knew the scripts off by heart and before I understood the processes and the stages of the process where I could kind of go off script anyway, I used to record myself reading out the script and then pause to self-guide. So I'd listen back and just pause at the part where I needed to take myself to a certain place or think about a certain thing, and then I'd press play again. I just have my finger over the press play and press pause button. That is literally how you do it, friends. And over time, I started understanding the stages of each of the tools that I was learning. So rather than relying on a script, I knew that, okay, for example, the first step would be to light up the feeling so that I know it would be gone, and then rate it out of 10 so I can see how it's shifted. And then there's the first step is closing my eyes and, maybe remembering something, whatever it might be. And then the next step would be blah, 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 blah. So I knew the steps and I could just guide myself through the steps rather than, telling myself a script. And I started understanding those stages so I could move through them really intuitively. And now I don't need prompts. I just know, and it's the best. In fact, one night I was on a surfing weekend away with a friend, and we had gone out surfing at my favorite spot. Now, I'm not very good at surfing. I'm not that confident. I just love it. But on that particular day, I'd had a super kooky, awkward day, and I kind of hurt myself and I got a little bit scared. And so I hadn't really been out for ages. My fitness wasn't there. I was feeling a bit nervous about the size of the wave. It just knocked me a little bit. And I noticed in my body, I was a bit sort of tense and anxious. And we were getting prepared to get up really early the next day and go out again the next morning. So as I laid in bed, I just asked myself, okay, what is this? Feeling anxious, feeling nervous. Okay, this is actually fear. Fear is an emotion. Okay, I'll use the emotion process. I'll just start there. So I closed my eyes and I took myself through it. And I'm just laying in bed and I had this really big, surprising, amazing breakthrough. Now, it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes the breakthroughs are just a really nice little shift in perspective. You feel clearer, you get on with your day, and you notice that you're not carrying around what feels like so much baggage. But in this particular process, surprisingly, I had this really big insight and breakthrough. I couldn't even tell you today what it was all about. I don't even remember. This was a couple of years ago now. So you don't need to remember what your big insights are through the tool. What matters is how you feel afterwards. But I got up the next day and I had no hesitation to just jump in the water, which for me was a really good sign of something that had shifted, because I was noticeably more excited to just get in the water. And then I caught one of the best waves of my life. And I really enjoyed it. And I wasn't scared. And I was not hesitating on the wave. I just kind of got up and I rode it in a very different way, very similar to how I had sort of envisioned through this self-coaching process the night before. Now, was it the process or was it just dumb luck that I got a good wave? Definitely, I would say a little bit of both. But even though the waves were really good to us that day, was noticeably more excited and more calm and really present and really noticeably just different from the day before. So I can say without a doubt that process made a huge difference to me, and it made my next day so enjoyable. And is there anything better in life than just having a really enjoyable day like that? So how you self-coach can look different. But if you've never done this before, I want you to think about the tools that you might have available to you to use already. Maybe you have learned something through therapy. Maybe you've seen or heard something on YouTube or a podcast. Perhaps you've taken a course in something and you've even forgotten that there were tools in the handbook or the manual to do that, to kind of come back to. Maybe you've seen something on the internet like EFT or tapping and you've never tried it before, but you'd like to. Like I said, you can look some stuff up on the internet or YouTube, and you can even have someone else guide you through these processes via like a video or an audio recording. And if you'd like to have a go at just asking yourself some questions to ponder, because it doesn't even have to be like a closed eye kind of process. It can literally be you sit down and ask yourself some questions and you answer those questions. And because of the nature of those questions, you're not asking, okay, how can I get out of this problem? Or like, what's the most logical next step to not feel this pain anymore? You're asking, what do I actually want? What's the outcome that I want? What would be something I could do that would be aligned with that? You start to come up with really different answers. So if you would like some support with like, what kind of questions can I even ask myself? I'm going to leave my self-coaching guide. It's a free tool underneath this episode. Link it under the episode. You can download that for free. But that guide is just one particular tool. It's like a spreadsheet with a whole lot of questions. You can self-coach with any tool that you have access to that you feel like you could just kind of use on yourself. And it's going to depend on where you're at and what you need. You might start with a goal setting process. You might start thinking about, do I have any emotions that are there that I'd like to clear? What would feel good? What's something that I know exists? Let me see if I can do that myself. Now, this is no different, by the way, to when I go and see a chiropractor or an acupuncturist or a physio or a masseuse, and I might be dealing with something in my back or my neck or whatever. This is no different to, instead of relying on needing to go back and see that professional on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or however frequently, and letting myself build up in pain and discomfort and then relying on that professional to be able to release all the pain for me. It's like coming home with a lacrosse ball and knowing how to do trigger point massage, self-massage, and just rolling around on that ball and keeping my muscles loose so that when I go back to the professional, we can see more progress, potentially faster, but more lasting kind of progress as well. It's no different to use these tools in self-coaching. You're not doing anything wrong by listening to it and doing it yourself. You do not need someone all the time to do it. So I want to talk about a couple of the tools that I lean on the most. I was actually thinking about this. I'd say that I have 5 that would be my favorite. And again, I want to just give you some ideas of the kind of tools that are out there so you can find some for yourself. So number 1 of my favorite tools is an emotional clearing technique from NLP. And I use it when I feel like my emotions are stacking up and I can't quite sort of catch my breath. I might be getting triggered. I might be feeling like I am reacting disproportionately to something, or something might have happened that has actually genuinely really triggered me. And I need to do some work to kind of clear it. And that's what emotions do. They don't get stuck. They stack. They stack up and up and up. And when we unstack them, everything softens. It doesn't mean you're going to turn into a robot who doesn't have any feelings. You're just going to be clearer. Again, I remember one night, not long ago, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were spiraling and I felt really heavy with something that I could not name. And I closed my eyes and just took myself through an emotional cleanse. I started with, I went through all the emotions over a period of about 5 or 6 nights: anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, shame, grief, and took myself through this emotional cleanse over about a week. I didn't get it right. Some nights I didn't even finish the whole thing because I'd close my eyes, I'd start the process, And I'm a bit of a scatterbrain, so I'd get distracted or, I'd sometimes even fall asleep and sometimes wake up and continue the process. But I woke up every day feeling lighter and more able to focus, and that was enough. Okay, so another tool that I love using is outcome setting. So a specific visualization tool to place an outcome that I can see and feel and that I desire and that I want, place it into the future. I want to say something on this. It's probably a little bit of a segue, or it's not a segue, like a side note. But I was chatting to a client just today about, what my thoughts were on whether you should or shouldn't put dates on a goal. And maybe I'll just mention this here because I really feel like putting dates on goals can really mess us up in a way, because if we forget that we made up the date and then we get closer to that date and we start stressing out that it's not going to happen, and then we decide that we've failed if it doesn't happen by the made up date, it really can take us out of the process, just really take us out in terms of you can't think straight, you can't be creative, it doesn't work. But a lot of people will say, like, don't put dates on things for that reason. And what I also know to be true is if we don't set a date for something and we set it out in the future, the energy that we are coming from when we're creating the result is this is going to happen for sure, but it's going to happen in the future. And it never moves closer because the energy that we've set it up to be is in the future. So what I really love is setting a date that feels close enough that it lights up a fire, but not so close that it takes you out, and then forgetting about it. And you got to think about it like opening and closing loops. Setting a date opens a loop, and you don't need to worry about the date after that. Your subconscious will work to close the loop by that date. So that's just a little side segue. But I do believe in setting dates on things, and I also believe in not setting them if it freaks you out too much. Okay, so the reason though I love to come back to the tool, the reason I love outcome setting is because even when it feels impossible to dream, simply turning your mind towards the future can start to shift your state. And when you're in a really challenging time, sometimes seeing beyond just like the next 5 minutes is actually way too overwhelming and way too much. So it's not always appropriate to be trying to set goals and think about the future, especially if you're going through trauma. But the intention to think forward can also start to shift your state. It doesn't mean you have to know the whole path, but just choosing a new direction can be very, very powerful. My third favorite is just a really simple forgiveness tool. I have a couple that I use, but if you've ever heard of the Ho'oponopono process, it's a Hawaiian forgiveness process. That's a great one that you can use anytime. Try and spell it. Look it up on YouTube. Really, really powerful. Really great story behind that process as well. It was created by a psychologist, I believe, or a psychiatrist. The fourth one that I do is just a good old-fashioned weekly review, which my clients do with me too every week. It's really simple, but it's really powerful. It's the same questions every week, and I may tailor the questions if there's something specific that I'm working on that I want to track results on. But in general, the questions are around what's working, what's not, what to keep doing, what to stop, what's energizing, what's draining, things like that. And then my biggest insight from the week and what actions maybe I can take to move closer to whatever I'm working towards. The thing I love about this is it's really simple. It's on a spreadsheet. I can see what I wrote last week and all the weeks gone by. So I can see the big insights that come in. And every week I look at the previous week and I think that was last week. Yikes, that feels like forever ago. And I can also see when I'm repeating the same answers and not acting on them. So it's really powerful in that regard. And my clients find this to be a very powerful process as well. And again, I will pop the link to a free one that you can download to give it a go underneath this episode. Number 5 is also an old-fashioned practice. It's just a really simple reframing process. Reframing means when you're looking at something, you're seeing it in a certain perspective. You could put a frame around it and say, that's how I see the world right now. Reframing means taking that frame and shifting the size of it, the shape of it, the perspective that you're looking at it from, so that you can look at the same situation from a different perspective and you will see it very differently. So you look at what it is that you are believing or what you're struggling with, for example. Let's say it is you're noticing that you are feeling like you always have to work really, really hard to make money or to be successful. And when you, in whatever ways that you feel work best for you, you would then take the time to reframe or disprove this idea to be true. And then you would find a better feeling thought. So you can move on with a new way of looking at it and feeling about it. So I might ask myself, is there anyone that exists on the whole planet who has ever been successful or made money and not had to work hard? And I might add more caveats to that, and that we're not born into it, and that, whatever. And just start there, remembering that, of course, the answer is always yes. Like there are always examples of everything, which means that it's a product of conditioning, not the ultimate truth. And then you just find another better feeling thought that feels slightly better. So one thing, again, people make this mistake with affirmations and stuff. Affirmations are amazing. It is you using language to create your world. But if what you're saying to yourself is so far out of your reality, your critical faculty in your mind, which keeps you safe, it's the guardian, the gatekeeper between your conscious mind and your subconscious. When you start saying things to yourself that are so far out of your reality, that's like the door bitch who's got the list. And she's like, no, you're not coming in. You've got open toe shoes on. Sorry, turn around, back of the line. And it's not going to work. But if you can just tell yourself something that's still true, but it feels a little bit better. Like, for example, you might say, I know of plenty of people who are the hardest workers ever and they don't feel successful or they're not making heaps of money. So I know for a fact that it's not necessarily true that that's the only way to create it. So therefore, what if it was, I can work smarter, not harder. And that's what success means to me. That's a better feeling thought. It's true. There's no arguing with that. Okay, cool. So we don't have to just walk around with this idea of I have to work really hard to make money and be successful. We've now got a better feeling thought, which is being successful to me means working smarter. Yes, I believe that. I can get behind that. I also know people who have worked really hard who have not made lots of money. Okay, that's true. So therefore it's not 100% true. All right, now we're just loosening it up. And that's a really great way to start messing with your own thinking, and messing with your own thinking is the most elegant and magnificent way to start embedding new ideas into your psyche. So I love that one. Good old-fashioned reframing. One thing I've really been reminded of too is how powerfully this works in the creation of long-term goals. A lot of the time we use coaching to try and fix a problem or solve a problem, but you can also use it for creating what feels impossible or something completely outrageous. And shifting your mindset in the micro moments is what matters more, in my opinion, than having a huge breakthrough change in your thinking just once off. Now, I'm sure you know of someone, maybe this is you too, who's gone away and had like a life-changing weekend, or they've gone to like some seminar or something, or they've had an experience, and a few months later, they're just back to their old ways. Self-coaching is like an insurance policy for making the time that you invest in shifting stick. And it does not have to be dramatic. You don't have to get naked and howl at the moon, though that is fun. You don't have to get rebirthed in a river, though that is very significant. You can just do this on the loo. You can do it in traffic. You can do it sitting at your desk at work, laying in bed before you go to sleep or before you get up. It's practical and it does not require anything but your mind and the time and the tool. Another way to look at it is this. A lot of the time, the tools you already have available to you are no fancier actually than what a professional would do with you in a session and give you. More often than not though, it's just that we don't give ourselves the gift of that time. And that's why I said earlier, the time piece is really important. And I used to think that when something felt really, really big, there had to be something fundamentally wrong, something really serious. It had to be really big and really hard in order to get over, get through it. But every time I actually just used the process, even just the first few steps, it reminded me, okay, this isn't broken. It's just an emotion, for example. And I know how to be with that. I know what to do with that. I can do that. So something we say inside of Be Your Own Coach is An emotion is an emotion is an emotion, meaning even when someone is really, 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 really angry, the emotion feels huge and overwhelming or impossible to process, it is still in the category of emotion. And what do we do with emotions? We use the emotion tool. That means you have the tools to work with it. And it is such a helpful way to think of things. And as a coach, sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in like how big perhaps a client's emotions are too. But if you can remember to find the category of what the thing is, you can kind of turn mountains into molehills effectively. So I'd remind myself when I'm self-coaching, like this feels really, really big and insurmountable, but it's still just an emotion. You don't need a lobotomy. You don't need to be fixed. You just need to remember that you wrote yourself a handbook and all you have to do is open it and use the darn tool. And it's a figment of your imagination that somehow your specific type of this emotion is way too special for a tool that has worked on everyone ever. So ultimately, this is a story and a reminder and an invitation for you. Self-coaching really has brought me back to what I know is always within my own control, my focus, my presence, my energy. And I want to say that when your attention is in your own backyard, you can work with what's real and you can process what's hard and you can see your vision again and connect to yourself again and take real steps forward. It does not mean that you never need support. I'll always have coaches who can see what I can't, but self-coaching means I'm never stuck waiting and I always have access to my own power. So this is what it means to live with a mind that you can trust, ultimately, a mind that you know how to guide and a nervous system that doesn't betray you but anchors you. So I hope this episode gave you a little something to exhale into today. Self-coaching is not about doing it all on your own or getting it perfect. It's often very unpolished and very imperfect. But it is about creating an inner space where you can just land and listen and lead yourself through whatever comes without having to wait. And then all of those extra supports just accelerate your results. If this kind of inner steadiness is something that you've been craving, remember that you have a free self-coaching guide underneath this, but also this is exactly what I teach inside of Be Your Own Coach NLP Immersive. And we're enrolling for that now if you feel the pull. You can find the link in the show notes or just head to hayleycart.com/NLP-training. And if nothing else, I really hope that you're walking away with this one reminder. You have got you. Always. You can coach yourself. So until next time, stay curious, stay open. The life you crave is closer than you think, and I will see you soon.